only their trauma, but their resilience. That resilience helped him battle through life's challenges. In the light of what is happening in the world right now, this interview with Willie is timely and enlightening. Stay tuned. You do not want to miss Willie's story.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Willie Handler has reinvented himself on several occasions throughout his work career. He has been a hospital administrator, a government policy manager, an insurance expert, and consultant, and I believe all around cool guy. Following his retirement from the government, Willie began a writing career. So we're going to talk about Willie's story, his career, his writing, his books. But first of all, let's see. But first of all, let's hear your story, Willie.
All right. Thank you very much. My story starts as a child, really. My parents were both immigrants. They came to Canada in 1953, Toronto, where I live now today, and they were both Holocaust survivors. They survived because of resilience and a little bit of luck and just their ability to endure an extreme amount of trauma. Unfortunately, many of the family members did not. They both immigrated to Israel or Palestine, depending on. My mother arrived in 1946. It was still Palestine, a protectorate of Britain. And my father arrived in 1948 after the War of Independence. And they met there and married. And in 53, they came to Canada. So I was raised in a household where I had two loving parents, but they were at times distant and disconnected. They really did not have a good sense of Canadian society. It was all new to them. They were both European and from very small communities, and also they were very, very focused on on the basics of life, which was housing, clothing, and food. And that was really so very much I was raised uh, on my own, so to speak, and particularly emotionally. And I also I have an older sister, a younger brother, and they were sort of raised in the same environment, and so that kind of puts a child when they're on their own a lot and in survival mode. And when I say a lot, there was no one at home to help me with homework, with problems with other kids or school. Um, no one to help me make decisions around course. Like no one to take me to sports, to play sports. if I played sports, it was on my own initiative. I'd have to take myself. And in those days, it's not like today. So
Right.
in that you could show up and start playing sports, and I would probably bring a note signed by my mother saying it's okay. And in fact, to show you how disconnected they were, and when I entered high school, they have a signature card in the office so that if you bring a note, they have your parents' signature. Well, I signed those notes because I have to write my own mother's notes, and she would just sign them. And at a certain point, I just said, "Oh, I'll just put the signature. I'll just I'll just sign for my mother, and the signature card in the office will be mine, and that way I don't have to chase after my mother." So literally, I'm kind of like I was always on my own and doing things on my own. So
Referring to resilience. I want you to
yeah.
expound a little bit on that.
Well, yeah, and I think I was going to sort of get into that. Like my
Okay.
parents were
Okay.
both they were both very traumatized. You cannot come out of that kind of an experience without being traumatized. I Whether they had PTSD, um, I'm not quite sure. I believe my father probably did, and and he could not really speak about his experience. If he did, he would start to cry. And so you don't ask questions. So I did not know a lot,
Oh, okay.
but I carried sort of both childhood trauma and inherited trauma, and I learned how to bury that, which I think my father did as well. How to bury that trauma, build a wall around myself, and keep myself protected. To a certain extent, that is resilience, and that worked for me for I would say decades. Um, and it also meant I kept people at a distance. I was not very trusting of people. That's just something that I inherited. Somewhat a little bit hyper vigilant. Um, and I kind of did okay. And so that's really the resilience where I had very successful careers, several of them, and none of this seemed to have impacted on me at all until I had thoughts of writing my parents' story at different points in my life, even though I didn't know it very well. And kind of sort of like pushed it aside. I was also busy doing too many other things, um, and then when the pandemic occurred, and I started thinking about it more seriously, and decided I was going to write this memoir, but not just an ordinary memoir. It would be the history of my family, um, my own youth, and talk about the trauma that um, I was experiencing. And though when I say trauma experiencing, I wasn't even fully aware of how much that I had. But as I began to write, I have a feeling I'm probably not the only person who during the pandemic lockdown started writing. And I just basically buried myself. I didn't know a lot of information about my family's history, and my parents weren't around at the time, and which was part of the reason why I was ready to write it because I couldn't write about them when they were still around. And but as I started remembering anecdotes, stories from my childhood, all this trauma was released. It had been buried deep. I did not even know existed. And it really started to have an impact on my mental health. I'd always had a bit of some anxiety, and I would occasionally have anxiety attacks, but I started getting buried. in anxiety as I was writing it, and my mental health started eroding to the point where I actually had to reach out and get help. And I sought out and found a very good therapist who kind of helped me work through all my issues. Um, and allowed me to finish my writing and start the next writing project. Um, but when I say this is not an ordinary memoir, I sort of refer to it as an investigative memoir because I knew so little. I remember the first time I tried to write my parents' story. I did it as a blog post, was 1,800 words. That's all I knew. And so I had to do an awful lot of research. I searched databases, historical books. You wouldn't believe what I found. Different websites,
Okay.
archives, even sort of academic papers. I listened to recordings of survivors. There was one of my mother done in 1995, and I never listened to it until about 3 years ago.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, so and started really pulling together their story. And when I wrote the book, the memoir, I kind of it basically also covers World War II and inserts my family into it. And so it gives readers sort of a broader perspective of what's going on and how they became involved because I was always told that the best way to learn about history is through people's stories, and the best way to to learn about people is to find out what their history is. So,
Right, right.
and I have to say it worked very well for me. And as and I remember when I finished my memoir, I decided my next book, I was going to explore intergenerational trauma of other people like me, because I became very curious about what kind of experience did they have. What was it like for them? Is it the same as me, or because when you're growing up, what I also learned is like myself, you never really talked about your family or your family's history to other people, even other people who are also children of survivors. We never spoke about it. And so it's now that I decided I'm going to reach out and find people and talk to them about what their experience is like. And that project grew considerably. And I ended up interviewing 100 people.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
and
Wow.
yeah, and then I started trying to sort of segment that group of people I was with because I was thinking, well, what is it like for this group or that group? So, for instance, about 20% of the people I interviewed were third generation. So, their grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I wanted to see how different they than their parents. And then almost
Interesting.
10% of the people that I interviewed, and this is probably the most unique part of what the book will contain because I'm not aware of anybody who did this. I interviewed, I don't know, about eight, nine people who were Christian.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
But their parents or grandparents, one of their grandparents or parents were a Holocaust survivor.
Hmm.
What I was interested in seeing is, well, surely they must have intergenerational trauma as well. And in fact, they really did. And not only that, most of them did not find out about their Jewish heritage until they were adults, 20s and 30s. And that
Wow.
revelation created a identity crisis. So on top of the trauma that they experienced, they also now had an identity crisis. And
Huh.
so it was interesting listening to how this all impacted on them. And that chapter in the book will be, I think people will find fascinating. And and sort of that's kind of like that's my story.
Right,
But
right,
but on top of that, I guess for many years I kind of like avoided anything. I think I inherited from my dad. Avoided anything related to the Holocaust. I figured I knew all about it. I don't need to know
right,
anymore.
right.
I ran away from that kind of stuff. What happened is that the writing of the book was not cathartic. So I often get asked that. It was very triggering, but when I completed it, when it was over with and done, it at that point became very cathartic. It was something I wanted to talk about, something that and then the Holocaust, I realized, I have a bit of an obligation here. I wrote the book partly so that my own kids and grandchildren and other family members would know the family story because I didn't even know it until I wrote the
Interesting.
book. And
Mm.
so that was something I wanted to pass on to them. Um, but the whole process was very, I would say, not only cathartic, but transformational. And
Okay.
I started examining my relationships with people and how sometimes they were a little dysfunctional, um, what I wanted to do with my life. It kind of had me rethinking everything. And so now I'm an active speaker on issues around the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and especially trauma. And and sort of that's become my life pursuit. I started running free workshops for other descendants of survivors so they could write memoirs as well. And so that's kind of like what's filling my life now. So there's been a it's been a huge arc in my life.
Now, how did that affect you emotionally back then and even now?
I was always sort of I was always had a lot of empathy, even more so now. There was a period of time I, I would say for much of my life I held in emotions. I didn't like to talk about myself. Write a memoir when you don't like to talk about yourself. If you think about how silly that was, um, but I
Exactly.
used to hold in a lot of emotions. I didn't like to express myself too much and my feelings, and I kept it to myself. And that really changed as I was writing the memoir. And I remember the first time I got feedback from a publisher about and the person said, "I thought you were writing a memoir. This is no memoir. It's, if anything, it's a biography, you know, or an autobiography." And I realized that I really hadn't hadn't personalized the book. So I went back and rewrote it and started inserting things like my feelings and emotions and things like that. And that kind of just sort of, again, accelerated I would say, my mental health spiral. So today I'm quite stable. Um, and I now have a proper balance of emotion. Then my emotions used to have wild swings because I
Okay.
had no I had no experience in managing emotions
Okay.
other than locking them up. And so now I've now gotten so I'm at I think a good balance where they're properly managed. And I think I'm in a very good place right now.
So what happened in May of 24?
Oh, I remember the date, May 19th, 2024. I was out for dinner with friends, and we're walking down the street, and I looked down this one street and recognized the home of somebody I knew who had passed away. And I'd had one of the few people I had sort of a close relationship with. And I had massive anxiety attack. I could barely made it through that dinner. And I remember I got home, I just spiraled. I felt worse and worse. And I could not sleep that night. I was up all night. And at one point, I can't go on like this. But I did remember my therapist, because I was getting therapy at the time, had passed on. If you ever in a crisis, um, here's some hotline numbers. And I was definitely in a crisis. And I called the number, and I think all they were concerned about is whether or not I was going to try and take my life. And I said, really, all I want is sleep. And I think they were able to calm me down that I ended up getting an hour and a half sleep that night. And the next morning, I just decided I can't go on like this. And so I reached out to um, my therapist, who had told me a couple times in the past that, I should really consider some medication as well. And so I finally decided that I would contact my doctor and went on some anti-anxiety meds, and it made a significant difference. And also it eliminated some of the wild emotional swings, made therapy sort of more amenable. And I think that day and night was a low point of my life, and I've kind of bounced back quite a bit since then.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Um, Now, tell us about your publications. You've written some fiction novels and also your memoir. So share a little bit about your writing and any highlights that you would like to share. That'd be awesome.
Right. And I remember when I left full-time employment and I was doing consulting. I didn't love it, and but it was paid well. Um, And I remember I was speaking with a friend. We were bouncing around ideas. We were even thinking of going in business together. And at one point, and she told me, like, you're such a strong writer. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I'm going, no, not really. But she kind of put that seed in my
Mm,
brain, and so I kind
mm.
of all right. And so I didn't even tell anyone. I just started writing a novel. And it was a fiction novel. It was a political satire. It was kind of like, it was, I wouldn't say it was sort of like autobiographical, but it certainly certainly the characters in the book, some of them were based on people I knew in real life, or they were a composite of several people. And it was a very funny book that nobody actually read, but those who did loved it. Um, and as I found that like political satire is not a strong genre. Um, and it was self-published. So I wrote another book, which probably is like until my memoir was probably my most successful book. It was a science fiction spoof that was very funny, very satirical, and it was a big hit. And then I followed up with another sort of a black comedy book, a bit of a thriller as well. So I was, and when this, prior to the pandemic, I was starting to write another humor book, and then then I kind of dropped it, and um, and when I decided I was going to do a memoir. And so now I'm kind of like doing nonfiction. I don't know how many people leap from fiction novels, especially humorous fiction novels, to very serious nonfiction material. But I
What are
have,
the
and
what were
will
the
I go
titles of those
will I
books?
go back to fiction? Probably one day I might. But it depend. I have no idea what my next project will be after the book I'm writing.
What are the titles of those books?
Oh, okay. So my first book is entitled The Road Ahead. And um, I, maybe that's probably my favorite book. Um, there's some such amazing anecdotes in there. And there's my favorite character in that book is probably a muse. And I'm not going to say much about it, but that character has a great piece of the story. The second book is called Love Mars, Hated the Food. I think the title speaks for itself. It's a book. It's a story about a chef who is in the first permanent colony of Mars, which happens to blow up, and he's the sole survivor. And then the third one is called Deep into the Weeds. It's about a dairy farmer who's runs into financial problems and decides to switch from milking cows to growing marijuana. Okay, so you can imagine um, all kinds of things probably not so good happen to him, and that's exactly what happened. Um, and so those are the title book, and my memoir is called um, Out from the Shadows, and which is a very appropriate title because it could have has multiple meanings. One of them
Right.
is that the shadow is the Holocaust that has followed my family around and other families for decades and decades and generation to generation. But the other is kind of like as I talked about how I had built this wall around me and I didn't like to be in the spotlight and things like that. And I kind of with the writing of this book, the memoir, I kind of left the shadow and decided I was going to um, sh allow that light to shine on me, so to speak.
And what's the message you have for the audience today?
Uh, I have so many messages.
Okay.
Um, okay, so one of them is that my life has been all about uh, chasing things that I'm passionate about, and they've evolved over times, and I picked up new things, but I think if those are things you might not always be ready to do at that point in time, but never totally drop the idea because one day that time might come around. The other is, and I do a lot of speaking about hate and what a destructive emotion it is. And if you look at the world today,
Right.
there's so much hate, and people don't listen to each other anymore. And it's I don't think mankind can survive on with with such a strong focus on hate and where society becomes so polarized. And I don't have a solution. I just know what the problem is.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. Yes. Word of encouragement regarding living with trauma and surviving trauma.
Yes, okay. There are many people have. Well, I guess one of the things I learned is like maybe 70% of population at one time or another has a traumatic event, and
What
a
was that
small
percentage? What was that
what's
percentage?
that?
What was that percentage?
70.
Oh, really?
Yes. Most of those people are able to heal themselves. Maybe 5% develop PTSD. And those are people who are probably not going to heal themselves on their own. And so I guess the message is don't be reluctant to reach out for help if you're not able to sort of overcome your own trauma. It's great to be resilient. I'm sorry. It's great to be resilient and to be stoic and so on and so forth, but it's not always the healthiest thing to do. And
Mhm.
that things that bother you, it's really important to speak out about them because
Okay.
what we're learning is that trauma, if it's buried inside of you, can change the makeup of your genetic material and get passed down.
Interesting.
And so next thing you know, your children are showing signs of trauma. And
Right.
so it's very important to talk about things like this. And as although I said writing my memoir was triggering, at the end of the day, when it was complete, it was very cathartic. And so that's another way that
Okay.
people can heal themselves. And so talk therapy is an important element, and so is writing. And so, or to join um, groups of people like you where you can talk among yourselves in a safe environment. So that's the kind of message I have that
Okay.
there's no cure for trauma, but
Right.
but you can learn how to really manage it well.
Very good point. Thank you. Well, I thank you, Willie, for what you shared today. I've taken a lot of notes there. I know that this is your story and the message and the positivity will definitely touch hearts. And I appreciate walking down memory lane with you, your parents' side of the story as well. And it just, in light, like I said at the very beginning, in light of what is happening today, this is very timely. And I hope that people will take a moment to think about, to reflect, and to understand other cultures and other people's history. And you definitely have triggered that, I believe, in a good portion of my audience. So I thank you for that.
You're
And I
welcome.
thank you, Willie, for being on Never, Ever, Ever Give Up Hope.
And and that's a great theme in itself because this world is repairable
Right.
and we can't give up on each other.
Perfect. Perfectly stated. Thank you again, and
You're
goodbye.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.